Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yay.
Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is the Drunk Duck QUACKCAST. With me is Baines and Tance. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
All right, so we're talking about perhaps a couple of things. One is lost in translation, which is when you have to you're from a different place from where your main audience is, and you have to change stuff in order to be able to be understood by that audience. Or if you're like depicting something your audience is used to, perhaps you don't have the familiarity with it that you think you do. Like, United States is the main audience for comics on Drunk Duck, and we have, as a main audience, what do we have to change in order to make our stuff understood by them? And when we depict something from the USA, are we really depicting that, or are we just depicting a media invented caricature that we think we understand? So that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we might get into the idea of characters that are not what they seem. These are characters who you, as a writer, present like, this very friendly, nicey kind of person who turns out to be an evil serial killer, or, like a supervillain or something like this. Or maybe they appear as like a kind of dark, vicious, evil character, but they're not really there. Kind of nice. Like, say, the man in black from The Princess Bride. He would seem to be, well, very, very quickly he seems to be like a villain, but, very, very soon he turns out to be a good guy. And the more we see him, the better he is, until, suddenly he's the absolute good guy. No spoilers, because everyone's seen that movie, and if you haven't, well, you should.
See, do something.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, so before we get into that, I have to bring up the featured comic. I featured a comic this week, which was rather pretty, and it was called Inner Enemy. So, have a look at Inner Enemy. This one is very much about a character who is not what they seem. It's about a situation that is not what it seems. So, check out Inner Enemy. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Inner Enemy. Aaron and Captain Deakins are working for the state. Their current mission is to bring in an escaped historian, Simon Mandel, who's working on Project 5. If they don't find him alive, they have to return his dead body. The wilderness outside the Citadel walls on Jupiter's moon of Ganymede is a dangerous place. It's very hard to survive a day out there, let alone after sunset. Whatever they do, they have to get him back before it gets dark. These are some of the last humans left alive anywhere. The settlement on Ganymede is humanity's last hope, so keeping track of the population is very important. Inner Enemy is a sci-fi adventure story with beautifully coloured art and creatively stylized artwork. It really has a very unique look to it. Colouring is in a sort of a cel-shaded style, and the drawing is quite angular and very, very stylized, very unique characteristic of this creator alone. So, yeah, it's good looking work. Sci-fi, set on Jupiter's moon of Ganymede, which is a very interesting setting location. And the society is sort of run by a triumvirate of three very strange people who sort of represents different aspects of the state, police and all this kind of stuff. So that's quite an interesting setting as well. These people live in this very controlled dictatorship, but it has to be a controlled population because there's so few people left. So yeah, it's an interesting setup, and I hope you will
have a look at this comic and read it and find out what Project 5 is going to be and what this historian Simon has found beyond the walls. So, have a read of Inner Enemy.
And that was the feature, which was Inner Enemy. Okay, after Inner Enemy, there is the featured music. Wallace has given us the theme to the Caraway Crew. What's behind that corner? What's out there lurking in the dark shadows? Why, it's demon breakdancing robots, of course! A mystery tale setting beginning gives way to a marching, mechanically robotic, stomping rhythm. So take it away, Gumwallace, with the theme, the Caraway Crew. And that was the theme to the Caraway Crew. Thank you for that, Gumwallace. Okay, guys. Audiences and regionalizing stuff, or there's a special term for stuff, you know, when you change it for an audience. I can't remember what it was. But I'm reminded of the little special feature on the DVD of Captain America where he's looking at, he comes to the future, which, you know, he's frozen in time, he gets woken up or whatever, and he's got this little pad of like a bucket list of things like he's meant to do, and there's 1 to 10, and it changes depending on what region the movie was made for. So in Australia, there's a bunch of things he's got, and it's really stupid, because as an Australian looking at that, and you look at his list of things he's got to find out about, you're thinking, why would he have so many Australian things on that list? It's stupid. It just does not make sense. Like, he's Captain America of America.
He wants to relate. He wants to relate to you specifically. Like, why? Why is that so wrong?
That was stupid. And it's the same for every country that he's got. Like, one's for China, and one for Japan, and one for, you know, I don't know, Paraguay, Uruguay, or something like that. And you think, that's a funny little Easter egg, but it's stupid.
Yeah.
Because Captain America should be American things only. But yeah, on this topic, we're talking about, like, so North America, well, not North America, the USA is the main audience for Drunk Duck comics, and for a lot of comics around a lot of web comics around the world. So we know that whatever we're going to put online, that's going to be our main audience. So our stuff should be relatable and understandable to these people. And we don't always know how to do that. We think we do because we all grow up watching, you know, American TV, reading American comic books, reading American books, movies, because that is the dominant culture for English speakers and pretty much the dominant culture for the Western world at the moment. But we still make misapprehensions, and we still have misapprehensions, and we still really don't quite know as much as we would think we would of, you know, what that audience wants. But we give it our best shot. For me, when I was doing Pinky TA, I have the American character Ace Kincaid, and sometimes I can make him a bit too... I think when I initially thought of the character, I was thinking a bit too broadly, and then you get caricatures, which is one of these things, you know, you always fall into. But for, say, Pinky TA itself, there were things I had to change and, like, tone down the Australianness of the comic in order to make it more relatable and understandable to an international audience, you know, and specifically an United States audience. Like, Australians talk with a lot of vernacular and a lot of swear words and things like that. And Pinky had part of her influence was Tank Girl, who is like that's a British comic designed with American sensibilities and a character who's meant to be an Australian. So there's a whole lot of stuff behind there. And yeah, so Pinky had a bit of that in her, but she also, and that also sort of tied into, you know, being an Australian, because she had, you know, Pinky is an Australian though. She's like meant to be some sort of Russian character. But what I'm saying is she had that kind of very nonchalant kind of way of speaking, nonchalant sort of way of acting, as well as speaking in a very vernacular way, with a lot of, you know, casual use of swear words. And that was just, you know, how she was going to be. Like, you know, Australians talk with quite vile swear words a lot of the time in our normal speech. And that just was not going to work. That would make the comic, like, I mean, even though it's like it's normal for Australia, that would just sort of give it like an A rating for an American audience. So I had to change quite a lot about the character, and it would, you know, even though like it's quite normal for Australians of all classes to behave in this way, it would make the character seem very low class for an international audience. So I had to change that as well. So yeah, I had to make her like round off all the rough edges, so to speak. So I had to change all that. And as well, Australian English is a bit old-fashioned in some kind of ways versus the American English. So there are changes there as well. I have to... Things that Australians say are sort of maybe anachronisms in American speech. So I had to change that as well. So those are examples for Pinky. So what about you guys? Consciously, did you have to change, you know, your own stuff to appeal? I mean, Terrence, massively you had to change your stuff because it's, you know, you're a Greek speaker, you're from Greece, English is not your native language. There are a whole lot of things there. And plus it's set in Greece. So you have to change your stuff a lot, you know, massively to be understandable to an international audience and specifically USA audience, don't you?
The biggest thing was, I guess, relatability and being able to offer the Greek flavor, because I really did want to get across what it means, what it meant at the time to be a Greek and how the culture is perhaps different in certain ways, but also not different to the point that it's not relatable to someone that isn't part of it. Because if I wanted to, I could have made it like a very weird looking to someone who is not a Greek.
Right.
Although, to be honest, if I were to do that, a Greek person reading the comic would go like, why are you like lathering on all the weird stuff we do in such frequency? Like, we don't do it this often. So what I'm saying is that there are certain things that I had either to present in ways that if I were solely addressing the comic to a Greek audience, I wouldn't have to do. While at the same time, I didn't really go out of my way to completely change, you know, the behavioral patterns and stuff like that. I just tweaked certain things that would have either been appropriate for the era or appropriate for the culture, so that it would be relatable today to all audiences and take into account current elements, let's say.
Okay.
Um,
That is interesting.
because I also have, sorry, I also have to take into account that this is Greece in the 40s. Greece in the 40s is different than Greece now, definitely, and the Greece during the 90s or the 80s. We're gonna see all these versions of Greece. Hopefully, if I, live to be 70 years old, I guess, and I keep doing comics, because the idea is to follow the history from World War II to today, more or less. So we're gonna see how the country develops and the culture as well. But at the time, there were certain norms and certain behaviors and certain things that even today would be super old-fashioned.
Yes, I was just thinking of that. When you brought up era, because Pinky TA is set in the 20s and times before that and times after that. And even though it's anachronistic and there's modern kind of aspects, I do often try and put in things from that era that would not necessarily be understandable to a modern audience. Mm-hmm. And you do realize that when you're doing it, when you're drawing something, that this is a very, this is a lost cultural artifact. And you worry, will modern audiences get that? Will they understand that this is era-based? And yeah, that's tricky. I mean, even, say, Baines, your comic, Typical Strange. You there, Baines?
Yes.
Okay. So, say, Typical Strange, it's set in this, initially set in a video rental place. So even like me saying video rental place, that's is that the word for it? Like in Australia, I think we used to call it a video hire place.
Yeah, I think it would be called a video rental store.
Right.
I think it's a video store. Yeah.
See, even now we're having to get the right terms for it.
And I mean, think of it even when I started the comic. This is just a little side trip. I'll be quick.
Yeah. No, go.
It was already kind of not antiquated, but it was kind of they were starting to disappear, although they were still around in the little town I was living in.
Yeah.
Now, just a few years later, really, or maybe almost 10 years later, now it's a complete artifact. It's like Jughead's crown. It's like, what the hell is he wearing? Whereas that had significance, and and Archie's car. When that comic was done, it's like, oh, it's an old junky car. Now it's like, how and why would anyone be driving that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's out of a museum. So, I mean, with the way things move now, that's kind of where I'm at. These things don't. I mean, for the most part, they don't exist. They're around, but usually it's a shelf in a tiny gas station, or a little room in a laundromat.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. That's, I mean, the video stores is that's a lost kind of thing. A lot of people just did not grow up with that, and they don't understand what it means.
Exactly. It's almost alien now, and I mean, a short few years from now, it will be almost completely alien.
And I like what you brought up about Jughead's crown. A lot of us looking at that had no idea, and it is later artists include that in their work, and in this the TV show version, and they change it, and he's still wearing the damn thing, but it doesn't have at all the same meaning because they don't even understand what it means anymore, and modern audiences have no idea. Right. So that's I mean, what did it mean? I always thought it was like a paper thing that he was wearing.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Me too. Yeah, I thought it was maybe felt or something like that. I made one when I was a kid because I loved Jughead so much. But it was a fashion thing when the Archie comic was new in the the 40s, early 40s, I think, where kids take fedoras and I think they turn them inside out and cut them up. So it's sort of an inside out modified hat.
Oh.
Oh,
something
okay.
that, kids and teenagers were doing at the time. And then, as the years and then the decades go on, it just looks like just a really like bizarre, like kooky, like just super idiosyncratic thing. They did change it. I remember in the comics they changed it at one point to a baseball cap, and it didn't work at all. It's like, oh no, it's essential to the character. I understand why they did it, but it's like, nah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the character becomes like the character design becomes so iconic that even if the era moves on, it's best to just leave the design as is and pretend it's vintage or something like that if something like that comes up.
Right.
But yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it, there are a lot of things that I have, like some methods that I have been following in my character designs that sort of shoehorn or disguise modernity, a lot of modern elements in the 40s outer shell, and that like stretching what would be tolerable in the 40s so that it will be relatable to the now. And one of the things is the hairstyles that I have been using. I am very much helped by the fact that these guys are partisans, and partisans were like the scruffiest thing that you could find in the 40s in Greece. They were really not following fashion. I wonder why. So it's easy for me to take some liberties with how their hair is, how they wear their hair, basically. But even so, I have to still have follow some norms that even people that would not follow fashion would follow, not because they are, observing how they should be, but because it's so ubiquitous that they also do it by the virtue of learning from example. So, for example, they all tend to split their hair, like have parts towards the side, either a side part on the left or on the right. Even if they do nothing else, they still split the hair, their hair that way. They tend to also like things that are very much coiffed around the head, whatever that is, and things like this. However, if I were to be strict in how things would be, especially in the city partisan group, they would be a little more proper in the sense that they would wear hats a lot more, and they would be their hair, everyone's hair would be significantly shorter.
Yeah, so they have to fit
and
in.
Exactly, and even the German soldiers, with the exception of, like, I have also taken the liberty for character design purposes. But for example, they follow a procedure in how they should have, the crew cut and the undershave and things like this. But again, it's to the limits. Like Raban's look, he has this tuft of hair that falls almost into his eyes, which would not be regulation. But you can explain away that thing because he is basically a rogue punk sort of guy. And if he were to be, inspected, he would just, use pomade and comb it back, and it would be fine. So there would be, that's how I stretch the limits. But I need to make them modern enough that modern audiences don't see them as weird people that couldn't be existing now, in a sense.
Yeah.
Sorry for
it would be alienating if everyone was perfectly period accurate. It would just be alienating for readers.
Yeah.
even cultural differences that they could accept. Like it just, oh, they don't feel like real people kind of thing.
Exactly.
So
That's
I
the
think
thing.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the German hair back then is very similar to the modern like styles at the moment that certain people wear. You know, it's very strict. It came from you know, the dying breath of the hipster movement as it mutated into some popular fashion, and then people had their shaved around the sides and long on top,
Yeah.
and very, very much. I mean, the classic Nazi look was a bit not totally just long on top, but that was one of the styles, which was exactly the way, you know, people were wearing it. Nowadays, it's meant to be a very correct and dressy look, and anybody who, you know, is au fait with you know, World War II imagery, it just screams Nazi.
But let's say military, because usually, and the reason that it was so ubiquitous was that it was very much the way to go if you were in the army. And at the time, a lot of Germans were in the army, one way or the other. So,
Yeah, well, fair enough.
You want color and sort of texture of the world you're recreating, or even if it's an imaginary world. I mean, you want it to be different. You want it to be true to itself, have an authenticity to it, whether it's real or invented or somewhere in between. So you don't want to shave away everything.
I like the phrasing.
Not just on the hairdos, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I've seen, you know, we've all seen terrible movies that are meant to be historical, and everyone's got modern haircuts. And you know, some dickhead might say, I'm just going to say they're dickhead. I'm just going to go out and say they're dickhead. They'll say, it doesn't have to be all period correct. But you see those modern haircuts in, say, you look at a 1970s film, 1960s film. It's set in the medieval times or whatever, or even like in the Old West, and they've got modern haircuts from the day, and it looks stupid. It dates the film so badly, and it looks dumb. And if a movie is made today and they have modern haircuts, it looks just as dumb, and it's dated, and it's stupid. So
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to kind of underline what Oz was saying. So go for it.
The thing I was just going to say is that there is a balance and a limit to how much you can stretch the whole modernization, quote unquote, of something that is period or historic. And if, for example, like I'm planning, if I ever get the time, to create another comic that would go in the 19th century Greece or even Byzantine times. I have a couple of yarns in my mind. But if I were to make a story about like 1830s, 1820s Greece, I wouldn't be able to get away with this kind of modernization. Everyone would have to have specific headpieces and stuff like that if I don't use, then again it will be detrimental to the story because it won't look authentic. The modernization will need to come in other elements to make it relatable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, we don't want to just talk about anachronisms, but making stuff appropriate to your audience. You got to be careful with it. You just can't go full on, because then you compromise your work. So if my characters were going to be, like if Pinky was not Russian, if she was like just Australian, I don't think that I would have changed that so much. I think I would have kept in a lot of the swearing and stuff like that. and the coarseness. I would have, been true to it. And, the anachronistic language and stuff like that, I would have kept it.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing, talking of please, no, you go on.
I was just going to say, like, with your Greek stuff, it still has to be a massive balance, though, because, say, for something that's Australian, we speak English and stuff like that, and the cultures they have a lot more in common, but for Greek stuff, there is a lot more divergence, so you're always going to have to make compromises, aren't you?
Yeah, in a sense. Like, I'm thinking now, for example, because there are choices that I have made that aren't as conscious. This one was, when they refer in the comic, when they refer to Nazis, in whatever context, they are always saying, the Nazis did this, or the Nazis are attacking, or, the Nazi here or the Nazi there. If I were true to the way that they were talking at the time, and not only at the time, up until at least the 70s or even the 80s, they wouldn't have said the Nazis, they would have said the Germans. Because at the time, Nazism was represented by the Germans because it wasn't actually a thing like a movement or a political, how shall I say it? It wasn't something that transcended the particular country, but it was just the whole, like, it was their political party, and they were all members of that party, and it was them. It wasn't the Nazism that was the problem. So, and that was, current at the time, just like it wasn't the communists, it was the Russians. So
I agree.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, if you watch a lot of old World War II movies, or back in the day when they still had a lot of veterans alive from World War II, no one said, "Oh, we fought the Nazis," and they didn't even say that in World War II movies. No one said they fought Nazis. They fought the Germans.
Exactly.
It's a modern thing to say. Oh yes, we were fighting those Nazi bastards. No one said that. They said Germans because they didn't care about the local politics of the people. That's a post-war rationalization.
But I chose to have them say the Nazis rather than the Germans.
Yeah.
Because right now there are two things, and the one isn't really very, very nice, I guess, about what I think about other people. But I didn't trust that all the audiences would know that this was a historical thing, and it wasn't me trying to just, paint all the German people in a bad light for some reason. So I didn't trust that. Not to
for the record, I think you're totally right about that. Definitely. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing, of course, but yeah, for sure, people would have taken that to be, what? It's not all Germans.
Yeah. How dare you? And I would understand, especially when I started in the 2010s and everything. There was a lot of bad blood being created, not rehearsed, between a lot of countries and the EU, and things like this. So I really didn't want the comic people to miss the point of the comic, which was not to diss the German people, because they have had a lot of suffering themselves from the Nazis that hasn't necessarily been publicized properly. And the first people that Hitler victimized was the Germans. So, however, so that was one reason, and the other was because I wanted to use it as a symbol in how the turn of phrase changes with my character that starts off a Nazi, And then, okay, it's not a spoiler really. I think if you can't see it already, I'll tell you now. Like he is on this trajectory of shedding certain delusions that were drummed into people at the time by the NSDP. So when people begin to refer to him as a German, that will be a significant change because he will not be part of the Nazis anymore. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I hope that I'm not really spoiling it for anyone, but that's I think that's signaled enough already by his dreams and all the things that he's been going through. So anyway, those were the two reasons. The first one being more significant than the other, I have to say. Well,
let's broaden this topic out a bit. Are there any like media things like comics or whatever you've seen where that aren't stuff that we've done, where you've noticed this people changing stuff to appeal to a specific audience because it wouldn't necessarily be understandable, so it has been translated, so to speak, in order to appeal to a specific audience?
I've seen moments that are, I mean, this isn't a regional thing, I don't think, so much as a, maybe a lowercase c cultural thing. You see stuff in different subcultures, like fandoms and musicians.
Oh, right.
Stuff like that being dumbed down and not really making sense.
Yeah.
I can't think of a specific example offhand, but like you watch The Big Bang Theory or something. So I'll just pick a really bad example where it's like that. It doesn't really ring true. If you're part of a specific fandom and they reference something, it's like, okay, but it seems like something you researched instead of something that you really get.
That's an interesting
like real
point,
fans would really talk like that, like.
Well, yeah,
it's too ham-fisted. It's too obvious. It's like, what? Nobody's sitting around. I mean, maybe someone, but it'd be the most dumb members of the fandom saying, kind of, just listing off facts or something like that.
Oh, The Big Bang Theory is a great example of that kind of, some fantasy version of nerds or even fantasy version of scientists. No scientists really act that way.
Well, exactly.
In the most broadest sense.
Yeah.
And as like, you've got them, we're going to Comic-Con, and like that was like very early in that show. That was like, oh my God, this is nerd nirvana. And I thought, well, very shortly after I started watching that show, I actually went to Comic-Con in San Diego, and I thought, oh my God, these people who write this show either have no idea what Comic-Con is, or they're translating it for their audience in a way, like some kind of like audience who will never ever go to that kind of thing, and painting it in this kind of way that's going to appeal to them in a way they understand, and that is nothing what Comic-Con is. Super mainstream pop culture event. It's not nerdy in whatever thing, this is like a massive media trade show in order to get products out and appeal to the mainstream general audience of the United States. It is not a nerd nirvana the way it was depicted in The Big Bang Theory.
Well, yeah, they're at least 10 years behind the curve if they wanted to, like, let's bring this so-called geek culture to the mainstream. It's like, yeah, it's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Star Trek being portrayed as some super geeky thing, and that hasn't been a super geeky thing for 30 years? What the hell?
And I mean, comics more so. It's the mainstream thing now.
Oh yeah, with the Marvel and all that kind of stuff, and those are specifically the characters they dress up as, the Marvel kind of thing, and depict them as being nerdy. And you think, whoa, no, this is people who don't read comics at all know all those characters because that's how mainstream it is.
I would contrast. Do you guys remember the movie Chasing Amy? I don't know if you were a fan of that.
Yeah,
kind
it's a good
world.
film.
So it's Kevin. I like Kevin Smith a lot in the '90s and stuff. I still like him. I haven't seen his movies in a while, but Chasing Amy was about comic book artists, and it ended up being a pretty, at the time, like unusual love story and stuff like that. But in the beginning of the movie, it's like these guys are comic book artists, and they're at a book signing. And at the time this was made, that was pretty unusual, and that really did have the flavor of you're getting a peek into a world that you didn't really know, that most people didn't really know.
Yeah,
of these sort of independent comic book artists, and like what they deal with, and that was a tiny part of the movie, but I really loved it personally on that level. Wow, that's kind of a neat little look at.
I like that aspect too. That was really. What it was like. That was a genuine view. Yeah, it hadn't been translated, and it made it even better because of that. Yeah, because you don't always have to translate stuff to your audience.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Taking the other way.
Yeah, that's a good
some
point.
things can ruin the drama or ruin the immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Like Vance was saying about characters being too different from what people are like now to be relatable. But also, it's in some other ways, like it's kind of like the authenticity of something without sanding away all the differences is what makes it great. Like that's what the kind of thing that'll really be very successful, possibly, right? Because it's capturing something that you're not seeing.
Absolutely.
On that regard, think of there's this TV show called Vikings that was quite popular, and a lot of people like that depiction. And it's massively, modernized. All the characters wearing black, this shiny leather and that kind of stuff, which Vikings never wore. And modern hipster hairstyles, the like multiple little plaits and dreadlocks and weird beards and shaved, No, we know Vikings. We know what Vikings' hair looked like. It did never, ever look like that. So it's got all that kind of stuff. And the way the Vikings act as well, not acts as in actors, but, behave towards each other is, like, understandable from a modern point of view. But if you read the Norse, the Elder Eddas, the Poetic Eddas, this was, which is the few recordings we have of how Vikings really behaved. They behaved and thought in ways that are totally not understandable to modern audiences.
Yeah.
It was just totally, they had different values, different morals, different things they thought were correct and right. And which means they would, based on that morality and their sense of right and wrong, they would act and think in different ways from modern audiences, and decisions they made would be totally different than what is understandable in a modern context. So you have to change all that in order to make it understandable to a modern audience, because you'd see a character do something or kill someone for some reason, and you think, why the hell did they do that? Because you wouldn't understand their way of thinking unless, you read the Eddas and you sort of get a feel for that and understand it. So yeah, you do have to change certain things because motivations don't make sense. That's a very Tance thing, isn't it? You have your whole newspaper about motivations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I finally decided to, open that can of worms. So yeah. But definitely, especially there are certain things like, for example, take something quote unquote relatively simple. If you had, there is one, if you had a story where honor killings were involved, and the whole point that you wanted wasn't to just, condemn the honor killings, which, by the way, should be condemned let's be totally straight that, nobody is condoning this. But if you wanted to explain away and give a study into why certain culture calls for that sort of thing and how this thing developed and in what era it developed and what it meant, blah, 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 this whole thing, you would need to basically structure your entire story around that before you even get to that event, so that your audience that is absolutely abhorred by honor killings would at least get to understand the point of view that they will still be rejecting, but perhaps be a bit more understanding of why it existed, in a sense. I recall there is a very influential book, a very classic book of Greek literature, and because I'm not trusting myself right now, I'm going to look up the author and scandalize anyone Greek that is listening to me. Anyway, because I'm supposed to immediately know it. But yeah, I blame alcohol right now for not knowing it. So 1 second.
I'll just take this second. Oh, you got it.
Okay. No, please take this second.
I was just going to say, like, people, if you want to check out the Patreon video, if you're not a Patreon member this week, because Tans shares some fascinating little tidbits about Greek body language. Not maybe.
Yes.
Not very interesting, very important, powerful gestures that you have to avoid if you're ever in Greece.
Yeah. Or know what it means if someone.
Or at least know what it means. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I found the book is called The Murderous, and it is by Papadiamandis, who is like one of the top 10 authors in Greece, very renowned and everything. And the whole plot of this novel is taking place in this very remote Greek village where children are being found dumped in the village well, where they get the water, and drowned, of course. And they are all female babies. So eventually, okay, I'm going to spoil it right now, but I don't expect anyone will, rush to go read it. It's very, very, it's a very heavy read anyway. So the point was that there's this woman that is killing the kids, and she's killing the kids as mercy killings, because the life for a female at that particular time in that particular village and the whole patriarchal condition and oppression and everything that was going on, at least in her life and things that she was witnessing, was so harsh that she felt that she was saving the girls from a life of misery. And in that sense, the author presents her in a sort of a tragic villain, but not exactly villain, like an anti-hero, I would say, not even anti-hero, something in between. As a whole protest against certain norms and certain things that used to be very, very oppressive in the Greek society of that era in the rural areas. So if you were to translate this to a movie, in order to even allow the whole point of the book to get across, rather than portray the whole of Greek society as monsters that abuse, babies, or monsters that abuse women, or you name it, monsters that blah, blah, blah. You need to take a lot of care on the setup and the setting and how you portray its character, in order to be able to then allow the story to take you into the problems of a situation, because that was a particularly harsh condition that had certain reasons for existing at the time in that particular village. So you would need to cut away a lot of things that for Greeks, like when we read it, we know exactly what the guy is talking about and the exact context, and we get the message. A foreign person wouldn't be able to tell which was completely, the norm and which was the exaggeration or the aberration of certain things. So that's what I'm saying.
Yes, that's very tricky ground when you're doing that. There's been that reminds me, this horrible director does these Serbian films. He is a Serbian director, and he got very annoyed by the fact that Serbian films are always very they want to portray like the best of the country, or the artiness, and he wanted to say, no, we're not all arty and we're clever. We have like a dark side to us as well. So he called this film the Serbian film, which is...
Oh, I know. Oh my God, yes.
So he has the most awful, vile things in there, and he doesn't care how he's portraying the country. He's sort of thinking all these other people are taking extra pains to present the country in the best possible light. Well, I'm just going to like cut through all your efforts and do this. And
I didn't know that's where that came from.
Exactly, that is the whole reason for it. He's just being a bastard. But every country has people like that. I mean, like in Australia, we have,
or he considers it propaganda, and he's just trying to cut through the dishonest. I have no interest in watching
I don't know. I mean,
it's not portraying Serbia in an honest way. It's portraying Serbia in like a dysphomistic way, and absolutely making it way worse than it is. So
it's basically okay. So that everyone is on the same page. It's about how they are making a series of snuff films, in a sense.
Yeah.
And seriously disturbed snuff films. So of course, one would understand that the snuff film culture, subculture, we're talking about the underbelly of the underbelly of the underbelly of the underworld. Okay, so it's not exactly...
Yeah, it's not reality.
Beyond reality,
exactly. Even. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, if that was his motivation, personally, I think that he probably failed. But unless he was doing some sort of commentary that we cannot read into because we're not Serbians. So there may be that as well.
But giving it that title, the Serbian film, means automatically a lot of people are going to think, Serbian films, that's what they're like. That's culture from Serbia involves this. Whereas it doesn't necessarily. Well, it absolutely doesn't. It's only this guy that does.
I mean, if he sees all Serbian films or most as total propaganda and totally fake, I can respect what he was trying to do, to sort of really, in the most hardcore way, cut against that grain.
Well,
and make a cultural statement that, by going completely the other way. I mean, I don't want to see the movie. But
don't.
I appreciate that.
I checked out in the first 10 minutes.
So there are Australian films, and then there's Australian films. So we have like Priscilla, the Queen of the Desert, which portrays like a bunch of drag queens doing shows to people in the outback. That's just not a typical thing, but it's a fun kind of view of Australia. Then there's Simply Ballroom, another famous Baz Luhrmann film that portrays like a heightened version of small town life with the ballroom dancing. It's fantastic. But then you have something like Wolf Creek, which portrays, this killer of backpackers, and
Well, I think I saw that.
yeah, like that's a very dysphomistic view of Australia again, but that sort of is a version of some sort of real serial killer that happened. It is not based on reality, but it's based on inspired by it, at least, and it portrays it in a particular way, and that gives an impression of the country to outside viewers, and it's not necessarily the truth of that locals know. But I don't know.
Have you ever had films that are sort of inside jokes or inside discussions, let's say, between the creator and the particular culture group?
Yeah,
in the sense that you wouldn't be able to understand it if you're not part of the culture, or even specific cohorts of that culture.
Yeah, certainly. Muriel's Wedding, that is an Australian film that Australians will get a lot more from than outsiders. Simply Boredom in a Way. There was one called something like the Kingdom or something like that. I don't know. It's about this guy. This guy who's really proud of his family, and he's got his house that's near the airport, and he's so proud of it. But he learns his house is going to be demolished to make way for building an extra one-way or something like this for the airport. And it's about how proud he is of his crappy little house in the middle of nowhere with planes flying over it, because it's like his little kingdom that he's built up, saved and put all his heart and soul into it. And that is something that it's a very Australian kind of thing that people would not necessarily get from outside. So yeah, there are definitely films like that the outsiders just would not understand it in the same way that an Australian audience would, and I'm sure the Greek culture is redolent with that sort of stuff. American films are redolent with that kind of stuff, that outsiders would not understand it the way Americans would, but we think we do, because we think the culture is ubiquitous. We absolutely think we get it the way an American audience would, but we don't. And regionally as well. There are films like from the southern states of America, or, the Midwest, or that, the rest of America thinks they get, but they don't. Only the people from that particular region really understand it. I wish we had Pitface on board to tell us. There's Canadian stuff as well that is, from a particular region that only, you guys would really understand. If like you're from, obviously like Quebec is very different from everywhere else in Canada, but maybe something in Ontario that only people from there would really understand. And outsiders would, like Lex, which was a fantastic sci-fi series made by English, Germans, Canadians, but there was a particular episode set in Newfoundland that had a lot of kind of stuff in there that only people from Newfoundland would really understand.
Yeah, that's where I am. We really like Lex.
You're a Newfie.
Hi.
But then again, that's another thing. So there's a particular way that Canadians regard Newfoundlanders that a lot of outsiders don't necessarily get. That is a very culture specific thing, isn't it, Baines? So, but
yeah, they don't care for us. Don't understand us.
And people on the east coast of Canada are very different from the west coast and things like that. Which, and that's something you only. Go on, Kans.
No. I was thinking that how in Greece every American is a Yankee, but I learned after talking with Pitface and others that this is not something you want to tell absolutely everyone in America. They will not appreciate it. So, but yeah, for us, a Yankee is an American.
Yeah.
From anywhere, everywhere.
It's the same in Australia. We call them Yanks. Yank meant an American. And you tell an American that and they go, no, that's only like, blah, 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 blah. But yeah.
Exactly.
We understand it. Yeah. What about so Baines, what's a movie or TV show that's something that Canadians would get a lot more out of than outsiders? They just would not understand it.
As you were talking about that, I'm sure we have it. I'm sure it's the case, but I can't really name specific instances, but definitely like Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah,
as much as it has reached beyond Canada, is very. I mean, it's so Canadian. It's so like, yeah, that's us.
Yeah.
Whereas some older depictions of Canadians, even on SCTV, which was a Canadian show, starring Canadians and written by Canadians, it's like they did these Canadian parodies that were like, what? Oh. That's like sort of trying to play to an American audience. I thought it doesn't ring. I never got it as much as I loved those guys. I love Dave Thomas and Rick Moranis, and they're awesome. But that particular one and other quote unquote Canadian parodies are always like weird to me. They never rang true to me. Trailer Park Boys does for sure.
Right. So yeah, it was too internationally focused, and it was caricatures, really.
I don't know for certain or for sure what their focus was. I'm now conscious of my Canadian.
Canadian.
I'm not totally sure what they were trying to do, but I just remember ever since I was a kid not liking it. Yeah. Whereas you watch Trailer Park Boys and it's like, oh man, that is so Canadian. We're not all exactly like that, obviously, but it's like, oh yeah, that's Canadian. Corner Gas, as much as it's a cartoonish kind of silly show, like, oh yeah, that's Canadian.
Yes, and even Trailer Park Boys, because that's been on for a long, long time and gone through a lot of different changes. That has become more, broader and more, international in its style. You watch the original movie they started out with, and that is quite a lot different, and it's a lot harder to understand for an international person.
That's
than
a good
the
point.
TV
I'm sure
series.
that's true. I haven't watched the newer stuff really, but yeah, I'm sure you're right. So.
Yeah, I haven't seen the newer movies, but the original movie was what the hell? That's not the TV series I remember.
Yeah. Well, I'll watch some English shows, and they're like, okay, this I really get. Even though it's got its nuances, like the early Edgar Wright, even Spaced, the Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg show was a lot more English. But I guess with the characters being focused on kind of American pop culture and comics and movies, like I got all of that. But then you watch I watch some English movies, and it's like, okay, I get it, but I don't fully get it. Like,
yes.
There's things that are important to these characters that I'm not fully understanding. You can tell.
Well, Space, that's a good example. I mean, not Space, but say Hot Fuzz was something. I listened to reviews on that by, Americans and people from all over the place, and they don't get things from it that I'd get. Like, I watched that movie, and it's like, oh, this is like a massive satire of all these British mystery shows from the 1980s and the 1970s, and mystery police shows where you go to a village and they're all devil worshippers and stuff like that, and and right. And every second person's a murderer. It's a Send Up for Midsummer Murders and all these different shows. And these American people doing reviews, they miss all of that context, absolutely all of it, and focus on it just as presented. Oh, this is just a movie about this. Oh, they just came up with all these storylines and plot lines themselves. They don't get any of those references, and it's weird to hear someone talk about that without mentioning all this stuff. It's a parody of this and a satire of this, and it's all that in there, and they don't get any of it.
I mean, especially for movies that are so beloved, people really embrace them internationally, but it's kind of funny to see that, there's like so much that nobody even understands.
Yeah, it's massive context. And it's the same with like American stuff. Yeah, like we said, like I would watch something like, and I'd think, wow, this is so cool, but not get all the cultural references that are, just filling it. Even something like The Last Picture Show, something like that, or American Graffiti stuff that's
like small town America.
Yeah, it's massive.
Small town America.
Yeah, exactly. The famous Meatloaf concept album, "Bat Out of Hell," which is you might listen to that like I did as a child and think, yeah, this is just like a 1980s hard rock, soft metal kind of album, whatever. But when you know a little bit more about American culture, you see, oh, this is like almost an opera. This is a concept album of what it was like growing up in America in the 1950s. That is like very like culturally specific stuff about someone's high school, burgeoning sexuality in the 1950s, and yeah, you have to have a lot more cultural context in order to get this kind of things, and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily.
Even the Beatles, right, had a lot of sort of very specific political commentary.
Oh, did they? That's
sure,
something I didn't get.
Even they would name politicians.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I had no idea about that.
And I have no idea what they're referencing. I love them.
Yeah, who's Mr. Mustard? That's one I don't mean. Mr.
Exactly.
Mustard.
Who is Maxwell Silverman?
Yes, Maxwell. Yeah, I see. Is that like a real serial killer? What the hell?
I don't think so. I don't think that's an example.
Polythene Pam. She's so good looking. She looks like a man. That's one of my favorite lyrics. Oh, deuce. Probably no one will get that.
I think it's Taxman. In that song, they're actually naming specific politicians.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, there we are. Well, we're running a bit over time here, and you, Baines, have to...
Yeah, I gotta get going, man.
Unfortunately, we've imprisoned you a bit too long. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe we'll talk about the characters who are not what they seem next week. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for being part of the QUACKCAST number 253, Lost in Translation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.